Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and back in November of last year, I predicted that the next case that Fractal would release would be the Meshify 2 Compact, and here it is. So today, the agenda is pretty much the same as all of my case reviews. I'll go over some of the specs and key features of the case. I'll build a full gaming system in the enclosure, which will be a little different than the builds I typically do on the channel. Once I get the system built, I'll be able to go over the build notes and highlight the good, bad, and anything in between about the case. And I'll take some thermal and sound level measurements. But first, I want to talk a little bit about where this case fits into the Fractal case lineup. Most obviously, it's the compact version of the Meshify 2, which I reviewed back in November and now houses my main workstation and network attached storage. Or you can look at it as the mesh version of the Define 7 compact, which I reviewed last October, and it's essentially the same chassis with a different front panel assembly and only one top panel configuration. But what I see this case as is the direct successor to this, the Fractal Meshify C. The Meshify C has arguably been one of Fractal's most popular cases since its release in 2017, and for good reason. In a time when most case manufacturers were going with solid or tempered glass front panels, Fractal released this full mesh front panel with a great style and design. It's still one of my favorite compact cases of the past few years. Now, 3.5 years later, we have the Meshify 2 Compact to fill the same niche as its predecessor. And on the surface, they look almost identical, but let's take a closer look at the differences between the two. And first off, we see the Meshify 2 Compact is slightly less compact than the older Meshify C, but not by much. The Meshify 2 Compact measures in at 16.8 inches by 8.3 inches by 8.6 inches, which only expands its footprint over the Meshify C by about 3.2 liters. The front I/O on the Meshify 2 Compact has been updated to include a 10 gigabit per second USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port. Now, while the front panels look pretty much identical, they're not. The Meshify C front panel is a single unit that consists of the complete front I/O and a permanently attached foam filter. The Meshify 2 Compact's front panel is more modular. The front mesh can swing open for easy access to the front fans and can be removed to gain access to the removable nylon mesh filter. Additionally, the entire front panel assembly can be removed, while the I/O assembly is now part of the chassis itself. While the Meshify C uses thumb screws to secure the right and left panels, which were common in its time and are still common today, the Meshify 2 Compact uses Fractal's new toolless top latching system for both side panels. Additionally, the Meshify 2 Compact has a fully removable top panel with a removable nylon filter located underneath the panel. The Meshify C's top panel is not removable and uses a simple magnetic mesh filter. A very nice upgrade is that while the Meshify C only offered two 120mm fans, the Meshify 2 Compact includes two 140mm Dynamic X2 GP14 fans in the front and one 120mm in the rear. The Meshify 2 Compact has two mounting plates for 2.5-inch SSDs that can be relocated from the backside of the case to the top of the PSU shroud, while the Meshify C has a single mounting plate which can hold three 2.5-inch drives. The last change between the two systems is the MSRP, as the Meshify 2 Compact is priced about $10 higher at $109 US. Now that we covered the most significant differences of the two cases, let's look at some of the other features and specs of the Meshify 2 Compact. First, as a compact case, it supports ATX, micro ATX, and mini ITX motherboards, but does not officially support any of the extended ATX form factors. The front panel can support two 140mm fans or three 120mm fans, and can support a 280 or a 360mm radiator. The top panel supports two 140 or two 120mm fans or a 240mm radiator. The case supports up to a 360mm graphics card, however, this max length is reduced to 341mm with the front fan installed, and is further limited if an AIO is used. The case supports a power supply of up to 165 millimeters with the drive cage installed, or up to 200 millimeters if you remove the drive cage. And you can fit a CPU cooler of up to 169 millimeters. This case also includes a modular design with the top panel / radiator bracket being removable. So, those are the numbers. The case is broken down and ready to build in, so I guess it's time to tell you all about the build. Now, this is a case review video, so the build isn't the primary focus, but I like to change things up and keep the content fresh. So today I'm going with an Intel build and using the 6-core 12-thread i5-10400. I'm doing more Intel stuff lately because 10th gen Intel has become the low budget option in recent weeks and is just in stock. Oh, how the tables have turned. I'm also going with a completely blackout theme. No RGB anywhere in this build. I'll be using the stock Fractal fans, and I have all black or mostly black components for the build, an MSI B460 Torpedo motherboard, a Be Quiet Dark Rock Slim tower cooler, and some black Corsair LPX memory, a 650 watt straight power 11 power supply, and a Gigabyte RX 5700 gaming OC for graphics. And that's it. Let's roll into the build montage. Okay, this stealthy build is complete. It's clean, quiet, and subdued. I like it, but before I get into the build experience, I do want to share one build note for this exact build. If you plan to use this exact MSI torpedo motherboard in this case, you'll need to connect the front panel USB 3 cable not only before you install the GPU, as the connector is directly behind it, but because of the 90-degree angle of the connector and the angle and location of the cable pass-through, you'll need to connect it before you screw in the motherboard, as you just can't get it at the correct angle once the motherboard is secured. I know, I tried. It didn't work out. I ended up bending a couple of the pins. I had to pull the whole motherboard and fix them. If this was gonna be my permanent build, I'd probably get a slim ribbon cable USB 3 extender for that connection to alleviate some of the stress on that connector. So that was a build tip. Now let's talk about the build experience in the Fractal Meshify 2 Compact, which, if you saw my review of the Fractal Define 7 Compact, the build experience was pretty much exactly the same as that, because once you remove the panels, you have the same chassis with one major exception. Fractal fixed the one negative thing I had to say about that case. They fixed the drive cage, and now there's plenty of space between the cage and the side panel for routing cables. Now, one of the reasons I really like Fractal cases is their superior build quality and tolerance. It's not just that every panel fits together seamlessly, but as a builder, I really appreciate things like when you drop the motherboard in, every standoff lines up perfectly with the mounting holes. Same when you plug in a graphics card, the mounting holes line right up. You don't have to try to pull the card into place and pushing on the back of the case and angling the thumb screws in at an angle and try to torque them in straight, like how installing a GPU can be on a lot of even higher end cases. Also, making building easier is the ability to remove the entire top of the case. Now, I didn't go with a top-mounted AIO or even the top fans for this build, which, having a removable bracket, makes installing those a lot easier. But in many cases, if you install the motherboard with a large tower cooler attached to it, it can be very difficult to plug in the 8-pin CPU power cable at the top of the board. But when there's no top panel, it's no problem. Now, speaking of top panel, in this build, the distance between the top panel and the top of my RAM sticks is only about 50 millimeters. So if I was to mount, say, this 240 millimeter AIO, which is 54 millimeters thick, the maximum RAM height I could use is 40 millimeters. Now, this is dependent on your specific build. In the build I did in the Define 7 Compact, I used a top-mounted 240 millimeter AIO, and my RAM was taller than 40 millimeters, and it worked because on that motherboard, the DIMM slots were positioned a little farther below the top of the board, so the RAM sat under the AIO fans by a couple millimeters. Not all motherboards are exactly the same, but the measurement I can give you to help you out is 33 millimeters. That's the distance between the inside top panel and the top of an ATX motherboard. That hopefully helps determine if your components will have any fitment issues. Some other tight tolerances to keep in mind is the pass-throughs on the bottom of the case. In order to get the HD audio front panel cable and the fan cable up through the bottom pass-through, I had to route them in before I installed the power supply and then carefully slide in the PSU. It's a tight fit, but that's the nature of compact ATX cases. What isn't a tight fit is cable management. I took about 10 minutes to clean up and manage the mess of cables, and everything fit well. Now, I'm typically not a fan of the plastic cable management clips or guides that manufacturers put in cases, as they tend to just take up room that could be otherwise used for, well, cables. But the clips Fractal includes aren't too bad and placed in the deepest part of the cable management area, so they don't get in the way. Plus, they clip out easily if you don't want to use them. Now, everything fit back here fine for this system as built, and I was able to squeeze the excess cables between the PSU and the drive cage in the bottom. However, if I had used a front-mounted 360 millimeter AIO, which would necessitate sliding the drive cage back, this might have been more difficult even with a modular power supply. Other than that, the build went smoothly. I don't have any complaints about the case, so let's take a look at some thermals and noise levels. For thermal testing, I compared the system temps at idle and at load using AIDA64 system stability test, stressing both the CPU and GPU to baseline temps. Baseline being the system out of the case on an open air test bench. Also, unlike the custom optimized fan curves that I used to test the Meshify 2, for this I just left the stock default fan curve, and even so, just like its big brother, there isn't a need for a bunch of charts. In the case, the CPU temps actually dropped 3.2 degrees and the GPU dropped 2.6 degrees at idle. Weird? Not really. Consider an open air test bench. There's no airflow across any of the components, and the only fan spinning is the CPU fan. These GPU fans don't even spin up at idle. But in the case, even at the default fan curve, there are two 140 millimeter fans blowing air across all the components, and that air movement is enough to provide additional cooling when the system isn't doing anything. At load, however, the CPU temp did rise by just 2.5 degrees and the GPU temp went up by just half a degree. Removing the front nylon filter only improved temps by decibels, which is what I found to be true with the bigger Meshify 2. All in all, thermal performance of this enclosure is excellent and is the best of any compact ATX case I've tested. As far as noise levels, with a background noise level of about 42 decibels, I took noise level readings at 1 foot from the front corner of the case, and at idle, the sound was barely audible. And only measured at about 28.7 decibels. Keep in mind the GPU fans don't spin up at idle. At load, with the GPU fans ramped up, the noise level rose up to about 46.1 decibels. Not bad for a high airflow mesh case, but again, I did consider this when planning the build and went with quieter components like the Be Quiet cooler and PSU, and well, the RX 5700 is just the only graphics card I currently have not already in use, but the 0 RPM mode is nice. So what do I think of the case overall? Well, as a reviewer, I try to stay impartial and objective, but as a PC enthusiast, I am partial to certain brands, and Fractal is one of those brands. I'm not gonna go all fanboy over them, but Fractal makes good cases. Not every case. That little ERA mini ITX one wasn't great, but this Meshify 2 compact is an example of a good case. So if you're looking for a case to build a mid-range to high-end ATX gaming PC or workstation in, either air-cooled like this one or maybe a 240 AIO, then this is a great option. Now, I did start off comparing it to its predecessor, the Meshify C, so to conclude, I'll say that this is an excellent improvement to an already great case, and although it's not so awesome that I'd recommend switching your system into it if it already lives in that Meshify C, but if you're trying to decide between the two for a new purchase, I'd go with the Meshify 2 Compact, even at the slightly higher price point. It's well worth the extra 10 or 20 bucks. Now, this case should launch at the time this video goes live, and as soon as it does, I'll add some links. And just like all the current Fractal lineup, the case comes in black, white, or gray with a solid light tempered glass or dark tempered glass panels. This is the black with a dark tempered glass for those wondering. But what do you guys think of the Fractal Meshify 2 Compact? Is it a worthy successor to the Meshify C? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you have any questions, be sure to ask. I hope you all enjoyed the video. That's it for this one. I hope to catch you in the next one. Until then, stay safe.